Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey, you have found another episode of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for coming along on the journey of this show that we designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every single week with Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, it's another week, and here we are again.
Hey, we're to number 101. Isn't that great?
That is awesome. We are at the 2-year anniversary mark in just a couple of weeks, and the show is going strong. We're doing a bunch of new things. I'm excited.
Yeah, so am I. Now, sometimes we let the weather sneak in, and I got to say, it snowed this morning, and I'm not happy. I really am not happy. It was no nice earlier this year. So anyways,
in Texas, we're skipping right to summer. It was like 95.
I don't want to hear it. Keep going.
Hey, everybody. The Digital Enterprise Society would like to invite all of you to join the new virtual roundtable series, the Digital Download. The series will provide a unique opportunity to have in-depth discussion with your peers across the globe around important digital transformation topics. Digital Download hosts will provide a brief introduction to that particular month's topic, and remaining time is there so that you have the opportunity to problem solve, share insights, and act as a sounding board outside the vacuum of your own organization. The first 3 installments on change will begin this May with a session on PLM is People. Now, today's guest is actually going to host the 3rd session in late July on the value of change. So look to this episode's show notes so that you can find the link so that you can get registered. So speaking of this week's guest, every single week, Craig and I try to bring to all of you really interesting interviews and other ideas that are going to help the listeners enhance and grow their careers. And today we have Nan Braun. Now, Nan, she is the CEO of Thavron Solutions. And what she does is she works with executives inside organizations to help them understand, model, and improve the solutions they offer. Hey, Nan, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, we're excited to have you. Can you give us a little bit of your background? Where did you get started in this whole world of PLM?
I've always been like an adjacent player and a challenger to PLM. So my start in manufacturing came at Delco, which later became Delphi, and started in manufacturing engineering. So the IT group that supported manufacturing engineering. So I spent a lot of my time building tools and solutions for manufacturing engineers who were often having to deal with the output of the things that came out of the PLM process from the design engineers. And so I was always that person who came back to my partners in IT who supported the product engineers and said, hey, we keep seeing this issue. How can we fix their tools and their processes to make all of this more streamlined and to bring this change about so that their results are better and manufacturing goes more smoothly? I moved from manufacturing engineering into sort of corporate IT and eventually became the enterprise architect for manufacturing. So anything that plugged into the plant floor anywhere in the globe for Delphi came across my desk at some point. And then worked with all of those people on many different initiatives, including where PLM crossed paths with things like SAP or plant floor systems. And so all those integration points, that's where I was always touching PLM and the life cycle. So we took the output and then gave them lots of feedback. So I've always been kind of pushing for a little bit of change in PLM.
But hey, Nan, welcome to the show. This is interesting. So a lot of product lifecycle management initiatives started with digitizing manufacturing, right? Mm-hmm. Let's figure out the flow and the floor, at least at the bigger side of the car companies, right? final
Absolutely.
assembly and building big parts. But here you're describing a different situation where engineering went off and did their thing. A lot of it's with electronics, and the electronics side of the business, digital tools came differently. Digital tools came about in electronics because of Moore's law, meaning that it was moving so fast
Absolutely.
that you had to have computer-based tools in order to design it well.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. What you're saying is then you guys in manufacturing had to go back to engineering and say, hey, wait a minute, you missed something, right? And so
Exactly.
I find it really interesting. This is what happens with technology is it grows in spurs and peaks, and then it gets squashed, right? You need to be a successful change agent when those two sides disagree, and especially
Absolutely.
if the catalysts are different. I could imagine somebody from Detroit was saying, well, guys in Kokomo, just use the same tools we use for final assembly layout. Well, that's just ridiculous because it's completely different, right?
Exactly.
Flow is flow, but it's a flow of very different things. And so one of my challenges as I became the PLM leader was educating the mechanical side that knew how to bend metal and drill holes in steel to teach them about software and electronics and all that stuff. So it's interesting. We come at this from different angles, but we needed change, and more than sometimes would happen. So
one of the projects that we did kind of like that is, that change point a lot of times is easier if it's data-based and not just emotional, right? And so, for example, coming out of IC tests, we put processes in place where the engineers could get feedback into the PLM system of the actual test data results of the designs that they had made. So they could start to see where things were not maybe performing as well as they wanted to. And they were getting feedback that they had never gotten before. And so just like any kind of change, having constructive, concrete feedback and something that has value to you, right? So not just somebody else coming and griping at you going, you're making my manufacturing life hard, right? Like engineers are like, suck it up, buttercup. But if you could go to them and say, look at these test results and your design isn't performing the way you thought it would, then they're like, oh, wait, like that's important.
So
know that.
Yeah. So when you said that, I was thinking test results of performance, like fatigue, or test results like we can't manufacture the thing you designed because we have a line rate that's this fast, and the thing you've asked for, we just can't do.
Yeah, sometimes it was failure rate, right? So, of course, being based in Kokomo, we had the semiconductor fab there as well, right? So we were testing ICs and looking at success rates on wafers and test results coming out of that. Or it could have been for pods or sensors or other things that were manufactured there and looking at either fatigue or other problems that could happen on the manufacturing line that design engineering needed to know about. And too often those two worlds are separate and they're not getting the full life cycle of data, right? If I make a design, I want to know the performance life cycle data for that and be able to feed that back and have my design process be smart about it, incorporate that, and get better at what I'm doing. So
that this wasn't the topic originally I was thinking about, but let's go off script for a second. So how do you justify to decision makers the need for storing this data, whether it's test data that's a performance evaluation or it's data off the line saying, well, we're having a failure rate of 1% and we're supposed to have a failure rate of 0.1%. What are we going to do about it? I mean, was there ever challenges in the storage and use of that data, or did everybody kind of see the wisdom and realize we needed more?
So it's interesting. The collection and storage of the data was never really an issue because there was always some sort of regulation requirement, right? That like, oh, if there's a problem later, we need to be able to show that we tested it and it passed and everything was good. What they didn't have was good use of that data. So what you find a lot of times as you go into either a PLM process or a manufacturing process, people generate lots and lots of data, and it's all these islands scattered all around.
Right.
And it's the ability to bring that data together and have it inform processes upstream or downstream that are important, and not just have it be stuffed in a data warehouse or a data lake somewhere and sit and use up storage that, regulatory, we have to have it and it's there, but nobody ever looks at it.
Well, you said a keyword in the middle there about processes, and I think a large part of the problem is people lose context. They lose the surrounding of, well, this data was collected at a certain time or under a certain set of conditions. Describe for us a time when the data really helped make a change. What was it? Was it just the fact that it was available, or was it a disaster and people were looking for answers? I mean, what makes a successful change?
Can I give you like a completely different instance? Because there's
sure.
I'm not sure how much of that I could talk about.
Well, then don't.
After the fact, like from the manufacturing point. But I can tell you some examples and relate some of the things that we're going to talk about this summer when we do the roundtable with the work that we do today, right? And looking at context and the context of the value of services, right? And what we find in the digital enterprise is that everything now relies more and more on IT. And people aren't necessarily thinking about what that means and how they calculate the value of their services, and where the context of how value is measured has to change significantly, right? So if I was using lots of widgets and buying them from a supplier and putting them together, it was really easy for me as a product owner to design, build, and sell a product and have full control of all the cost drivers and have transparency to that and really understand how my product lifecycle was going to go and what it was going to cost and what my profit could be off of it. And I could fully report that out. But now I have all these digital tools, or I may even be making products that are digital. And now I'm reliant on services from other people inside the organization. And too often I don't get good understanding of the cost of those services, or whether I should choose an inside service provider or an outside vendor, or even how the organization as a whole measures value. So for example, we had a client who worked for a company where they do lots of acquisitions, and they went out as an IT finance director and talked to this new vice president product line of this person. And his first thing was, well, next year my IT costs have to be about $20 million less, or I'm going to have real profitability.
So he knew cost, but he didn't know value. That's what you're going to find out, right?
Exactly. But we could say, hey, that seems like a really bad approach. You're looking at your costs very isolated, right? He's like, well, what do you mean? I'm asking my process people how to improve things as well. And it was like, oh, well, I bet a bunch of those process people, they're telling you to automate stuff, right? Put some digital tools in place and automate it. He's like, how did you know this? Like, well, first off, talk to lots of people. So that's kind of how the digital enterprise goes, right? We want to automate a lot of those things. Guess what? That takes IT. And that means you're going to actually have to spend more money with IT to automate those things. And so now you need to think about value as, well, if I automate this process, or I can automate a design and have a digital tool, I can save $200 million. But my IT bill is going to go up by another $50 million. Well, net, the value to the organization is $150 million, right? But the context of that value is really important, right? Too often if you go, well, here's your IT budget, and here's your product budget, and here's your marketing budget, and you look at those separately, in a digital enterprise, you're going to spend more someplace and you're never going to see the return for it. And over here, you're going to see the return, but you might not properly see the full cost for it. So the context becomes very important in a digital enterprise. So
it was mentioned in your introduction about modeling, and I'm thinking modeling processes. Did I get it right?
So sometimes modeling processes. Sometimes we do a lot of cost and value modeling as well. So we'll model the value stream. We'll look at and actually build financial models and help people to understand cost and value for that. We map and model processes, and then look at how those fit together. And then the real value of that is being able to what if, right? Like having a model is great, but in today's enterprise, everything changes. And you need that base model so that you can model your changes and, again, make data-driven decisions and drive your change to priorities that make sense.
So the priorities sometimes are confusing, maybe even in conflict, because people have different measures in their different parts of the company.
Yes.
And so does what you're suggesting, these modeling services, help bridge those gaps where people can see, oh, the real problem is we're measured differently, and therefore we're always in stress, right? Because we're going after different things. One place wants the step improved, and somebody else wants the cost of the step improved, but neither one wants to actually look at what the value to the company overall goes up if we do that, right?
Absolutely. And I don't want to talk too much about that, but I'm going to use that as a teaser because that's going to be a lot of the discussion that we have at the session in July.
Well, I was a tool guy for a long time, and I finally got process religion mostly from another engineering leader who we had this exact debate over and over. And I find it interesting that you have a manufacturing background, because I think it's manufacturing process engineers that get this better than anybody else. And so the rest of us need to learn from you. When somebody starts talking value streams and process modeling, they really should pay attention, because what you're going to learn is, whether your metrics are consistent, and the next thing you're going to learn is how to make better business decisions long term. So interesting. So you talk about being an effective change agent, and I'm curious, was that something you've always known, or did you stumble into that in your career or in your education? The importance of being a good change agent.
I stumbled into the title and the concept of it, but I was kind of a natural change agent. I wasn't afraid to challenge things. I was the kid who would go up to the teachers and go, "This is really cool, and I'm loving this, but can I have more work? Can you give me something different?" I want to approach this differently. Can we have an independent study on this, right? So I was always kind of challenging the way things that were done and looking at
so go one level deeper. Is that because you're curious, or because you're just contrarian, or both?
I think it's because I'm curious, right? And some of that goes to my background is actually in biology, which is a very strange thing, right? I have a master's degree in developmental biology. So patterns and systems and system of systems thinking is kind of what I've grown up in. And that curiosity of how things interplay and how they work together, and being able to leverage that to think outside of things, right? So the things I learned on the plant floor, we went and challenged IT with. At Delphi, we built FMEAs for IT back in the early aughts. Right, we were challenging them to I'm learning this lean stuff. I got to study with some of the Japanese greats in lean because I was on the plant floor, and I went, why aren't we working like this in IT? Why doesn't marketing work like this? Right, looking at the e-business model way back when it was new in the late 90s, and looking at the way that e-business passed information around and trying to apply that to manufacturing. And we took a whole bunch of things we learned from e-business and applied it to manufacturing execution systems and manufacturing controls. So I think it's really important that we be open to the way people think about things and look at how we can apply them in new contexts.
So go to the other side of this. When you ran into folks that resisted change, and you've got models and you've got data, but they still resist change. How do you handle that? What's a good change agent do when you hit that barrier?
It kind of depends on what your role is, right? Okay. So if you're hired to be the official change agent, you have to kind of push them and make them comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's my job today, right? When you work within a corporate setting, there's some things that you can do, and you can raise issues up and you can raise change up, but you also have to understand that sometimes you can be the change agent and see exactly the right path forward, but if there's somebody above you making contrary decisions, it's completely out of your control. And so there are real barriers that you can hit in the corporate world that at some point you have to say, they made the decision, right? I informed them, I gave them all the best information, I presented them with the right path forward and the path of how to make the change. And if they choose not to take it, then there's not a whole lot I can do. And that's a hard thing to live with.
And I think you see what the new measures are, if the measures have changed, and then you collect more data, right? And I've dealt with different folks over my career where sometimes it's a notion of the right time, right? Yes. You don't give up. You keep collecting the information, the insight, and their leadership changes, business climate changes, gosh goodness, things like a pandemic occur, right? And when those opportunities, let's be optimistic about it, when they occur, then maybe that's a time to bring up a change that was resisted previously, especially if it's a change that can help you stay in business. So
never waste a good disaster. Somebody famous said that. I can't remember who said it, but I've lived by it for a very long time, right? Like, don't waste a good disaster. Sometimes you have to wait for the right time and circumstance.
I know I've used it, and I know I didn't create it, so it was probably in some book somewhere that we read it, but it makes sense when you think about it, right?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that kind of thing. So the pandemic has been with us for over a year now. Mm-hmm. Depending on where we are in the country, it waxes and wanes. But let's talk about digital tools and PLM, your experiences as a change agent and as process modeling. Mm-hmm. Have digital technologies eased or worsened changes driven by the pandemic? Have they gotten in the way or have they helped? And talk a bit about a little of both.
But in most cases, it wasn't the tool's fault. It was the infrastructure or the way that people were using the tools. And so as people have shifted that, tools are enabling all kinds of things, right? I mean, early on, we saw in lots of different ways where people were like, well, we're all just digital now, but then they didn't realize they had a network pipe issue.
Okay.
And, I have really large design files that I need to move around across the globe. And when we're all digital, that takes a whole lot more pipe than I have in place. And so they had to scale up and get that moving, right? Or somebody just wasn't well trained or not efficiently using the digital tools, and now they've had time to get more proficient at it. So I think it's helping a lot more now.
Now, it's a long time ago, but in the late 1980s, I was a part of the team there in Kokomo that talked about the size of the pipe in and out of Kokomo to get to Detroit, right? And It was kind of interesting, all the challenges we went through. It just... we were the ones that put the first workstations at the proving grounds. The Delco guys were, and we couldn't get a pipe from Kokomo to Milford. It was really ridiculous. But that was a long time ago. So in this pandemic, how fast did those kind of problems get solved? I mean, the telecommunications companies, to their credit, are pretty good at solving that. Did. Yeah, I mean they have it. You just got to buy it.
I was astonished at how fast they got solved.
So
normally,
sometimes
those kinds of projects take a whole lot longer, and all of a sudden happen twice as fast as we thought they were going to.
So give us some examples of changes that happened because the pandemic pushed them. I mean, telecommunications might be one, but are there others?
People's comfort with being flexible with time and conversations and media of how they're having those conversations and the restrictions around those, right? The other big one is shoes. That's the one I keep hearing over and over again. Nobody wants to go back to the office because they all think they're going to have to put their shoes back on.
Oh, wow. Yeah, their shoe budget go back up, right?
Yep.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, okay. No, seriously, like I cannot tell you every single conversation I have about going back to the office, people are like, but I'll have to wear shoes again. So apparently we're all naturally hobbits.
I'm not wearing shoes right now. I do have pants on, but I do not have shoes on.
Thom, I don't think we needed to know all the details, but it's interesting. I don't have shoes on either. I go around my house in my socked feet. That's what I always do, right? So interesting. Well, this has been an interesting discussion. I am very pleased you're helping us in the Digital Enterprise Society, and I look forward to that. I'll make sure I tune in. I also have just flabbergasted and pleased that you talk about modeling and having it improve decision making. I don't think people do that enough, and especially in this day and age where we work remotely, it can be even more powerful, right? And that is a digital technologies, right? We should probably use it more. Yep. Got any other thoughts you want to leave with me regarding change management and change agents?
I think that in some ways people have become more comfortable with change because they've had to live through so many changes in the last year, and they've seen that they've survived it, but they're also getting change fatigued. And that's a real thing. Just like decision fatigue is a real thing, change fatigue can be a real thing. And I think we need to be cautious about trying to say, oh, we successfully navigated at 90 miles an hour for the last year, so maybe 90 miles an hour is the new normal. And that is probably not going to be the smartest thing for the people in the process, and the burnout will get to people if we try and do that. So we're going to have to find a way to transition from 90 back to 55 or 60 and keep going there with occasional surges up and not living at 90 miles an hour.
That's a good summary. The next change is getting back to a better balance in life, which is really difficult while we're in this pandemic. So, well, thank you so much. Thom, back to you.
So Nan, I like to keep our guests here for a minute after Craig's done talking about, the technology and everything. And I like to get down to a couple of pieces of career advice, because you talk to a lot of executives. It's what you do for a living, right? You're helping people grow, not just their companies, but their own careers and the people who work for them. In addition to that, I love it that you are just this change agent. And I'm thinking for our listeners, there's a certain percentage of them who are like, I want to be a change agent. So let's flip this to career advice for people who are listening, who still have a long ladder that they can climb. What are some things they need to do and maybe model to grow their careers? And then the second part of the question is, can anybody be a change agent? And if yes, how do they do it?
I'm going to do that in reverse. So I think, yes, anybody can be a change agent, but I don't think it's the right decision for everybody, because you have to be incredibly comfortable with uncertainty. Right? So if you can look around you in your day-to-day job and see opportunities for improvement, or have ideas about changes that need to be made, and know that they may or may not work, and that there's a lot of data crunching and exploration that needs to happen, and you're comfortable and excited about that uncertainty, you're a natural change agent, right? Then it's something we should talk about. If that makes you kind of anxious, then it's okay. Not everybody has to be a change agent. I mean, in fact, if we were all trying to do it, it would be a real chaos. Right?
I was going to say, if everyone was trying to be a change agent, we'd get nothing done, because everybody'd be pushing for their change.
That's right. But I think, learning how to take emotion out of decision making, and learning how to be observant and look for opportunities and look for learning new ways to collect data and leverage data that already exists. Right? So what you don't want to do is generate new work if you don't have to. How can you leverage the information and intelligence the organization already has to empower new decisions and to get smarter about things?
I love the fact that you lived up to the way you described yourself. You said you like to do things your own way. So I asked you a question and you just reversed the question and answered it in the opposite direction. That's awesome. So any other piece of career advice for the listeners?
I think follow where your passions lie. And don't be afraid to get more education. There are great opportunities out there. I know the Digital Enterprise Society has great opportunities for continuing to learn, and think outside the box. Maybe there are other organizations who are leveraging interesting processes and methods that might work for your field. Be willing to take things in a new context.
That is great advice. Never stop learning, keep learning, look for places that offer learning, like the Digital Enterprise Society and their digital download series, which is coming up. So remember to check the show notes or the website for digitalenterprisesociety.org so that you can find out more about the digital download series. And you're going to want to hear in late July, the third installment, when Nan Braun is right there. So Nan, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much. This was great fun. We'll connect again sometime soon.
Awesome. And thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. Do Craig and I a favor. Come back every single week. And go tell all your friends who work in and around PLM that we have the best podcast that they could listen to right here at the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. And remember, the Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.